August 1590. A battered wooden ship finally cuts through the thick fog off the coast of North Carolina. The men on board have spent 3 long, brutal years fighting storms across the Atlantic just to reach this tiny island. They were coming back for their families, 115 men, women, and little children who were left behind in an untamed wilderness. You can only imagine the mix of relief and anxiety in their hearts as their boots hit the wet sand, lanterns swinging in the pitch-black dark. But as they pushed through the tall grass toward the fort, the relief vanished. There was no sound, no laughter, no children playing, no fires burning. But even stranger, there were no signs of a fight, no blood on the ground, no destroyed homes, no bodies buried in the dirt. It was as if an entire village had simply evaporated into thin air. The only trace left behind was a single word, 5 letters, carved deep into a weathered wooden post. Croatoan, Croatoan. No cross above it to signal danger, no message, no map, nothing else. Think about that for a second. 115 human beings, husbands, wives, newborn babies, gone without leaving a single clue behind. 400 years later, modern science and archaeology still cannot explain where they went. So what really happened on that island? Did they perish in the shadows, or did they choose to disappear? This isn't just another dusty story buried in an old history book. This is America's very first true, unsolved mystery. Long before Jamestown was built, long before the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth Rock, and way before the United States even had a name, there was Roanoke. It was the first real attempt by England to build a permanent home in the New World. A fresh start for families looking for hope. But that dream didn't end in a grand battle or a documented tragedy. It ended in complete, bone-chilling silence. When you really think about it, that silence is what makes this so haunting. There was no confirmed massacre, no evidence of an epidemic, and no mass graves were ever found in the dirt. Not a single survivor ever made it back to England to tell the world what went wrong. 115 ordinary people, mothers, fathers, and young children, were simply erased from the pages of history, leaving behind a single carved word as their final goodbye. Tonight, we travel back to the year 1587 to piece together the clues and uncover what really happened at the beginning of the end. It all began with pure ambition. Back in London, Sir Walter Raleigh, a favorite of Queen Elizabeth, envisioned an English stronghold in the New World to challenge Spain's dominant empire. So in 1587, over 100 brave souls boarded ships to cross the vast Atlantic. These weren't hardened soldiers. They were everyday farmers, skilled craftsmen, wives, and young children, all seeking a better life under the leadership of Governor John White. But when they finally landed on Roanoke Island, reality hit them like a cold wave. The terrain was harsh, the weather was unpredictable, and worse yet, local native tribes were deeply suspicious, thanks to earlier, aggressive English explorers who had already ruined any chance of easy trust. Almost immediately, panic began to set in. Supplies were dwindling at an alarming rate, and winter was fast approaching. The settlers quickly came to a heartbreaking realization. Without urgent help from England, they wouldn't survive the year. Desperate, Governor John White had to make a choice no father or leader should ever have to make. He had to leave. He boarded a ship back across the ocean to get food and reinforcements, promising his people he would return in just a few short months. But what made his departure truly agonizing was who he was leaving behind on that shore. His own daughter, Eleanor, and his newborn granddaughter, Virginia Dare, the very first English child born on American soil. As White watched the shoreline fade into the horizon, he held on to hope. He had no idea that this was the last time he would ever see his family alive. John White expected to be back in America within 3 months. Instead, fate trapped him in England for 3 brutal, agonizing years. Queen Elizabeth was locked in an all-out war with the Spanish Armada, and she ordered every single ship in the country to be impounded for national defense. White begged, pleaded, and tried every connection he had, but it was useless. Can you imagine the unbearable torment of sitting in London, staring across an ocean, wondering if your daughter and newborn grandchild were starving or frozen to death? By the time he finally managed to secure a spot on a privateer ship in 1590, it was dangerously late in the season. But he didn't care about the risk. He just needed to reach his family. And when he finally stepped onto the silent soil of Roanoke, his absolute worst nightmare was realized. The village was completely deserted. But here is where the story takes a dark, mind-bending twist that most people completely miss. Before White left in 1587, he and the settlers had agreed on a secret emergency code. If they were ever attacked, forced to flee, or in imminent danger, they were supposed to carve a Maltese cross into a tree or post above their location. A cross meant violence. A cross meant we were taken against our will. But when White closely examined that wooden post, looking for any sign of a struggle, there was no cross carved anywhere, not a single one. That means whatever happened to those 115 people, they were not under attack. They didn't flee in terror. They packed up their lives on their own terms, leaving behind just one word, pointing toward a nearby island and its indigenous inhabitants, Croatoan. So if there was no blood, no attack, and no panic, why did John White never see his family ever again? Here is where this story takes an almost devastating turn. John White actually tried to sail toward Croatoan Island to find his family, but fate stood in his way once more. Fierce ocean storms battered the ship, snapped the anchor lines, and a near-mutinous crew refused to risk their lives any longer, forcing White to sail all the way back to England without setting foot on the island. He never made it back to America again, eventually dying years later with a broken heart, never knowing if his daughter or granddaughter were alive or dead. For over 400 years, people clung to terrifying legends of mass slaughters, mystical curses, and pale-eyed ghosts wandering the southern forests. But modern archaeology has recently uncovered a far more realistic, yet deeply moving human reality. In recent years, excavations on Hatteras Island, the historic home of the Croatoan people, began pulling shocking evidence out of the soil. English signet rings, European gun parts, slate writing tablets, and 16th century pottery, all buried right alongside Native American artifacts from that exact time frame. That means the settlers likely didn't vanish into thin air, nor were they dragged off by monsters in the dark. Faced with slow starvation, bitter cold, and an English crown that had forgotten them for 3 long years, those 115 human beings simply made a quiet, brave decision to survive. They walked toward the only people who offered them help when their own country offered them nothing. They integrated, lived, and built a new life alongside the native community, slowly fading out of written history, but living on through bloodlines that still walk those lands today. There are no grand monuments marking where the lost colony finally ended up. There are no graves to visit, no final letters to read. Just a single weathered word and 4 centuries of absolute silence. But maybe that is what makes the mystery of Roanoke so different from every other tragedy in history. It was never a story about death or destruction. It was a story about human survival, one so quiet, so deeply personal, that history simply forgot how to tell it. somewhere inside that single word, carved by hands we will never know, lies the last trace of 115 people who chose to walk away and disappear rather than wait for a rescue ship that was never coming. And honestly, if stories like this stay with you and keep you up at night, this channel was built for you. Make sure to subscribe and stay with us, because in our next documentary, we are going to investigate the mysterious pale-eyed legend that followed their descendants for 400 years, and find out whether the truth is stranger than fiction.